Coming up on Over a Barrel.
They've been extending it month to month, but now this time, a little over a week ago, instead of extending a month, they extended it through the rest of the year. So that took markets by surprise. And that's part of the reason why oil is so high at $90 a barrel, is because the Saudis and Russians surprised markets by extending their production cut through the end of the year.
That and so much more putting pressure on oil and gas prices. Over a Barrel starts right now. Welcome to Over a Barrel, the weekly podcast, and sometimes more often than weekly. I'm your co-host, Matt McLean, along with Patrick DeHaan, the other co-host. And Patrick, we have so many things to talk about in this episode. It's almost mind-numbing. I mean, there's a little bit of everything out there impacting gas prices, oil prices. You name it, you can basically point a finger at it, and something's going on between hurricanes and crude oil prices topping $90 a barrel and so on and so on. Talk to us a little bit about some of this stuff. What is it that you're seeing?
Where do I dig in? Yeah,
I know, right? There's so much.
There is. I mean, between Hurricane Lee, which is taking aim for a major refinery in the Maritimes, and for those Americans who don't recognize what the Maritimes are, that's the kind of the extension into Canada, off the coast there, New Brunswick, that area kind of northeast of Maine. And so Hurricane Lee's taking aim, and hopefully it won't be a hurricane by the time it gets there, by the way. So the National Hurricane Center, I mean, Matt, if you've looked at this storm, look at how far out the hurricane force winds and the tropical storm force winds extend out. It is amazing. You know, some of the Hurricane Hunter forecasts, by the way, I was looking at social media, some of the Hurricane Hunter, you know, how they show the path of the Hurricane Hunter aircraft and the wind speed as they're passing through these various areas. Like the entire flight as they got close to the hurricane is all like pink, meaning that hurricane force winds are huge. I think at one point, hurricane force winds were extending out like 80 miles from the center, which is just massive. So,
tropical storm force winds are actually spanning out a radius, if you can imagine, that covers well over half of Texas as far as a geographic thing that you can visualize.
Like it would at least touch 5 or 6 states if you put it in, it would at least, the tropical storm force winds would be affecting like 4 or 5 states. And Matt, it looks like the hurricane force winds, if you put this thing right over Florida, the hurricane force winds would extend from Tampa all the way over to like Daytona Beach. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about the entirety of the Florida peninsula would be, the width. The hurricane force winds are wider than Florida peninsula. So rather impressive.
It is one of those storms. And, hopefully it will be down to what looks like a post-tropical storm, Lee, as it makes landfall. And it looks like it's going to make that landfall probably right just to the east of the state of Maine into portions of Canada. That doesn't
New
mean
Brunswick.
Obviously. Yeah.
Right on top of Irving Oil's refinery, which interestingly enough is literally starting maintenance here in the next couple of days. So, it's hopeful, to your point, Matt, that this would move into post-tropical rather quickly. The National Hurricane Center actually shows it, look at the most recent graphic as we talk to, as a tropical storm making landfall at about 8 o'clock Saturday night, basically right on top of that Irving Oil refinery, which, by the way, Matt, to give you some backdrop on this, the northeastern United States, what we call Pad 1, which extends from Maine all the way down to Florida, that's Pad 1. All of those states along the East Coast represent a region of the country. PAD is an acronym for Petroleum Administration for Defense Districts. It's one of the 5 regions of the country, and Pad 1 is infamous now for having very little refining capacity of their own, partially due to the fact that in 2019, a major refinery in Philadelphia caught fire and permanently was dismantled and shut down. That refinery had now it would represent over a third of the capacity in the entire region. So this Irving Oil refinery has actually become the crutch for refined products into the Northeast, because many of the products, the diesel, the gasoline that are produced at this refinery would flow into the Northeast. So keep an eye on this facility, which, like I said, is undergoing maintenance or will be There could be a rise in the price of diesel and gasoline in the Northeast. So if you're listening in the Northeast, just know that with this refinery down for maintenance and now having to deal with what could become, Tropical Storm Lee, there could be some consequences at the pump, whether it be diesel or gasoline in the next couple of weeks. And that just covers the hurricane aspect, Matt. There's a couple other areas of interest as well that are churning out in the Atlantic to keep an eye on. A new system, I believe it's Invest 98L, is west. I think it's basically straight west of the Lesser Antilles right now, the Cabo Verde Islands. So keep an eye on this. But again, hurricane season's not over yet.
Oh, no, it's just getting basically warmed up for the most part. Are you, I am seeing some like tropical storm warnings and watches even into Massachusetts and
Boston,
Connecticut. Yeah. Are you concerned of any supply issues or anything in the Northeast, basically from New York east toward Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, all of that?
Not so much. I think a lot of the reason is because there's a lot of transit options in those areas. Having said that, it's staying a bit off the coast. We'll have to see. But the only good news, Matt, in this is that, by the time it gets up to these areas, now it does look like as it stays hundreds of miles off the coast of like Boston, Massachusetts, it's still going to be a hurricane at that point based on what the National Hurricane Center is saying. So it is only, I believe, a Category 1. I just got that pop up that it has been downgraded to a Category 1. That's the good news. Maximum sustained wind is 85 miles an hour. So I think because of the reduction in intensity, I don't think there's going to be much of a problem, Matt, with products flowing into that market. But again, this system is going to be moving directly over the Irving Oil Refinery. And that refinery, if it's going to start maintenance, it's probably not shipping out as much product. So I wouldn't be worried about it being the route from New Brunswick into the East Coast being severed. But again, there's some noise here to keep a track on. So I think that covers the hurricane portion of things. Moving into the lower 48, there's still a lot of other issues, man. We talked about it last week, the Corn Belt. If you remember back a week, the Corn Belt, we were just getting word of just seeing the first numbers that gas prices were about to spike. At the time, we said somewhere in the ballpark of 25 to 75 cents. Then we upped it to 50 cents to $1. Then a day after, we kind of revised it back to 35 to 65 cents. And that just highlights the amount of news, Matt, as you know, being a former newsman.
Oh, yeah.
News can change very quickly. Situations develop. But all of that did transpire, Matt. So the price of gasoline in the Corn Belt spiked pretty significantly. I think at one point, Iowa was up 50 cents a gallon week over week. Minnesota was up 50 cents week over week. And looking at some of those areas now here, prices are still elevated. Now, I think they're plateauing in the Corn Belt. We're going to start seeing prices decrease soon, especially, Matt, now that the key date, we've talked about this all summer long, the switch back to cheaper winter gasoline for most of this country is less than 48 hours away.
That's there's a lot of stuff there's a lot to unpack there with what you've been talking about.
Whew, I'm going to catch my breath now.
Right. So, and then the other things that we are monitoring, crude oil prices kind of going through the roof, so to speak, over $90 a barrel for the first time since November of last year. Then you're talking about the U.S. has now contacted oil producers and refiners as the prices are rising. The U.S. Department of Energy talking to the producers and refiners to basically, try to make sure that there are stable fuel supplies. There's just a lot going on there. So kind of talk us through some of this. It is not abnormal, no matter who is in the White House, that the administration, be it a Republican or Democrat, for, the Department of Energy to reach out to oil producers and refiners. Yeah. We should put an asterisk there and say, hey, it's not abnormal for that to happen in moments where it's necessary. So why is it suddenly becoming necessary now for all of these things to begin to transpire?
Well, I think the Department of Energy is staying on top of the situation, right? We have seen so many refinery issues this summer, Matt, and a lot of them have to do with the warmer than expected temperatures, especially in areas that don't see them. Even Southern California, remember the hurricane, that impacted refineries, causing outages. So there's just been a lot of refinery snags because of the amount of heat that we saw. I mean, even up to Chicago, Matt, we did hit triple digits here in Chicago, and that impacts refineries in Chicago. You always say that refineries in the South are best positioned for heat. They're worst positioned for extremely cold weather. Remember the Texas cold snap in 2021 and all the burst pipe pictures you saw on social media? Yeah. So refineries there are better prepared for the heat and they're worse prepared for the cold, but that doesn't mean they're fully insulated and ready if it hits triple digits. Whereas up in the north, we're better insulated for those bitter cold temperatures. We're probably less prepared for those ultra high triple digit temperatures. But having said that, Matt, the extremities, the 100-degree heat is going to impact a refinery, whether they're in the north or south. There's only so much you can do. Just like a human body, there's only so much you can do to cool off. There's so many layers of clothes you can just rip off until you're just sweating profusely. There aren't a whole lot of layers that refineries can remove to adequately cool their facilities. So it's just been a summer of refinery issues. And that's what we're still dealing with, Matt. We're talking about the Corn Belt. It was refineries in the Corn Belt. A lot of that was exacerbated by the switch over to summer gasoline. Matt, as this transition is happening, refineries don't like to produce a lot of leftover expensive summer blend of gasoline, right? If they know their competitors are probably going to be able to sell winter gasoline pretty quick, refineries are just timing it. They only want enough summer gasoline basically to be left over for maybe a half a day after. And so what happened in the Corn Belt is the timing was off. One refinery just came up short. They anticipated, hey, we're not going to be able to make it through the next week and a half with summer gasoline we have on hand. And part of that could be because demand at that refinery might have been higher. It could be because of refinery maintenance, which was unexpected. But that's why the squeeze happened in the Corn Belt, because a refinery needed a little bit more summer gasoline to get through the system. They got really desperate, which basically sent the value of summer gasoline through the roof for the remainder of the summer gasoline season, which, like I said, it runs through Friday, and then Saturday, most of these areas across the country, in fact, everyone but California, can make a switch back to cheaper winter gasoline on Saturday. But that's why that squeeze in the Corn Belt happened, is because refineries don't want to sit on weeks and weeks of supply of summer gasoline when their competitors are going to be able to sell a winter blend for less. So that's why refineries are just timing it right. They want enough summer gasoline to get through the 15th, but you don't want to have another, weeks of supply of summer gasoline because You're going to be disadvantaged.
Yeah. So that's wow. So there's
and those are just the refinery issues in the Midwest. Don't even start to talk about the California issues.
Yeah. So, okay, you took the words right out of my mouth. So let's talk about the California issues. What's going on there?
Jeez. Help it. Yeah, Southern California, I mean, ever since the hurricane, they've had issues there in Southern California. And now, Matt, by the way, we are outside the summer driving season, right? Labor Day was a couple of weeks ago now. And so refineries are starting to do maintenance. As I mentioned, Irving Oil, right, in the path of what is currently now Hurricane Lee, is undergoing maintenance. Part of the reason in the Corn Belt was because refineries are starting maintenance. Part of the issue, Matt, is now we're entering maintenance season, and that's putting even more pressure on a constrained market. So when a refinery has maintenance, they're planning on it. But then when there's an unexpected outage that happens, there's less ability for other refineries to fill the void. So that can lead to price spikes. And basically, Matt, now the entire West Coast, the Rockies, and the Corn Belt have all been dealing with refinery issues. California, the average is up 10 cents a gallon from a week ago. They're starting to get close to $6 a gallon at some of these stations again. And by the way, the average price for diesel is back above $6 in California. The average for a gallon of gasoline in Southern California, in LA, $5.57. And all of this is happening because of various refinery kinks throughout much of the country. Now, having said that, we've been hearing from some political, folks in the political space that prices are up everywhere. They're up in quite a few places, right? They're up in the West Coast, the Rockies, and the Midwest, but they're not up everywhere. In fact, looking at gas prices today compared to a week ago, earlier this week, there were 25 states that were below their week ago prices, Matt. There were 23 states that were above the week ago prices. But because the price of gasoline is changing on a daily basis, looking here and now at prices compared to a week ago, now there's about 36 states that are above their week ago price and 14 states below the week ago price. And Washington, Georgia, Hawaii, Florida, Indiana, Illinois, Oregon, they're all below their week ago price. But some of these states, Matt, in fact, 15 states are now seeing prices 10 cents above their week ago level. And a lot of it's still in the Corn Belt. Nebraska's up 26 cents, North Dakota up 25 cents, Oklahoma up 25 cents, Minnesota up 24. Like I said, the Corn Belt situation should be alleviated significantly with the change to winter gasoline this weekend. But for many other of you listening, the bulk majority, Matt, of the United States is paying a bit more. But the good news is that it's not a ton more, at least in most areas. The national average, which is the index that we look at, the national average is up 3 cents from last week, Matt. But it's also exactly the same as it was a month ago. So for all those politicians that are saying, oh, it's so bad in your neck of the woods, yes, it is bad in the Corn Belt. Those issues are going to be solved soon. But the national average, Matt, which is an average of all 50 states, is exactly the same as it was a month ago. So to paint that picture, it's pretty bad in some areas, but that also means that some other areas are paying a bit less than they were a month ago.
All right, so let's move on for just a moment into some geopolitical things when it comes to the war going on between Russia and Ukraine, and also what's going on between China and Taiwan. The United States really has their fingers in both of those types of situations. Emergency alerts on NATO territory in Romania. Everyone had to kind of seek shelter within the past 24 hours as the war was dragging on along the Romanian-Ukrainian border, and they were fearful that some of that would spill over into Romania, which is a NATO country. And then there's also a Russian fighter jet that fired 2 missiles at a United Kingdom spy plane to shoot it down over the Black Sea. Obviously, the UK, also a member of NATO as well, and that is quite provocative in nature. Then you move on to Taiwan, where you have the Chinese military surrounding Taiwan with 140 warplanes and 50 warships in kind of what they are calling an island encirclement patrol. Now, right now, it's being called a drill. But, Russia also said they wouldn't be invading Ukraine either. We're not trying to create a fearful situation, but just trying to basically present fact. And so what is basically happening in those two areas, geopolitically speaking, if NATO gets dragged into a Ukraine situation more than it already is, or if Taiwan becomes a problem for us, the United States said that they would stand with Taiwan. Where does that leave us when it comes to really the price of oil and gasoline, and what kind of an impact could it have on that?
Yeah, Matt, as you mentioned, there's a lot geopolitically still going on, especially China. Now, China's not a huge player in terms of, what happens in China is a little bit less relevant because China is not a massive oil producer like Russia and Saudi Arabia are. Keep in mind, too, that the primary reason for oil now being $90 a barrel is because of Russia and Saudi Arabia's war on low oil prices. And, there's a lot of political stuff that's being said that there's a war on the U.S. oil industry. By the way, U.S. oil production is basically just now barely under where it was in early 2020 before COVID decimated the industry. So U.S. oil production is almost back at record highs. The real war that's happening is not on U.S. oil production. It's a war being fought by Saudi Arabia and Russia, who are fighting a war on low oil prices. Go back to the summer when oil was $65 a barrel. That's when all of this started, is that Russia and Saudi Arabia were sick of having to sell oil at $65 a barrel. Plus the Saudis have a lot of bills. And so, the Russians and the Saudis have cut oil production. And by the way, I think we talked about that maybe briefly last episode, but now that production cut they've been extending it month to month, but now this time, a little over a week ago, instead of extending a month, they extended it through the rest of the year. So that took markets by surprise. And that's part of the reason why oil is so high at $90 a barrel, is because the Saudis and Russians surprised markets by extending their production cut through the end of the year. And now that's put the market into a bit more of a danger zone, Matt, because right now, we're probably losing the war between supply and demand. That is, demand is probably exceeding supply. And that's part of the reason why oil prices have found support, is because whenever there is more demand than there is supply, markets get very nervous and that pushes the price of oil up. And now you enter into the equation China, the instability happening overseas, and there's more risk, right? That there's going to be a disruption somewhere in the system of oil production or, transportation. So there's a lot to keep an eye on. And destabilization, oil hates turmoil. And so there is a lot of risk there.
And it's not just oil that hates turmoil. I mean, the stock market hates turmoil. Business owners, large and small alike, dislike that turmoil, no matter where that turmoil is coming from, because it really does create a ripple effect, to put it the best way that I know how, with regard to all of that. So, there's a lot to keep an eye on with regard to everything that we have just mentioned, and so much more. So, where are we going over the next several days in more of a prediction, if you will, for crude oil prices and for prices at the pump? I mean, right now, let me go back over to the oil price. We're sitting at, over $90 a barrel as we're recording this. Yeah. It's at $90.19. It's up $1.67. Again, that's the first time since November of last year. So where are we going now?
Well, and keep in mind, last year there was a bit of an energy crunch that caused gas prices to skyrocket in October of 2022. So where we're going, Matt, is the national average has been hanging out at this low 380s basically since a month ago. As I mentioned, the national average today is actually exactly here at this moment. It's exactly the same as it was a month ago. So we've been hanging out in the low 380s now for a month, even though the price of oil has slowly increased. So there's a war happening too. I mean, geez, we're talking about a war all over the place. Saudi Arabia attacking the low price of oil. There's been political talking heads saying the war on U.S. oil production, which isn't really true. And now we're talking about this other war on what's happening with gas prices. And right now, the tug of war, we're going to call it, is being won so much by downward momentum, right? There's a tug of war happening between the Russia and Saudi Arabia. The price of oil, basically, on one side is pulling prices up. On the other side, pulling prices down on that side of the tug of war is seasonality. Summer's over. Demand based on gas buddy data has been very weak. I almost say anemic. Last week, the gas buddy data showed that U.S. gasoline demand was about 8.59 million barrels a day, which is pretty weak for this time of year. In the summer, it's normal to be in the low to mid nines. Back in 2019, we even hit 10 million barrels a day. So the fact that that gasoline demand plummeted to 8.6 million barrels, that's pretty weak, Matt. But that's gas buddy data. Looking at government data, which is also critical, the government showed that gasoline demand, they call it product supplied because they don't measure it like Gas Buddy does. Gas Buddy measures gasoline that's actually sold through our payments card. The U.S., the Energy Information Administration, basically measures how gasoline disappears or moves down the supply chain. And last week, they estimated that products moved for gasoline was about 8.31 million barrels a day, Matt. So put that in context. The prior week with Labor Day, there was 9.3 million barrels of product supplied. The last week, it was 8.3 million barrels of product supplied. That's a huge drop in gasoline demand. So that's part of the reason why, Matt, the seasonality, the drop in demand is going to pull prices down. Because when demand falls, that means there's more breathing room at refineries, right? So that is offsetting, at least for now. The drop in gasoline demand is partially offsetting the rise in oil prices. Now we get a big boost this weekend again to cover it for the 15th time. With the switch over back to cheaper winter gasoline, that means that there's going to be more butane in your gasoline this weekend potentially or next week. Butane's very cheap. And so the downside to the pump is offsetting the increase in the price of oil. So I think maybe not immediately, Matt, because some of the refining issues that have hit the Corn Belt, the Rockies, and the West Coast, you may see prices inch up. But I think by late September, early October, I think barring more refinery issues, I think most of the nation is going to start seeing lower prices. And I don't think they're going to go a ton lower. Part of the reason is because oil prices remain high. right? We're not going to be going down to $3 a gallon, which is what we saw last fall. But I think we could conceivably see, $3.50 a gallon by the end of the year if everything goes well. So relief is coming. It's going to take a little while. It probably will overpower if oil prices go up a little bit. It'll overpower that. I mean, if oil prices suddenly explode, Matt, well, that's a different story. But I think there is a good amount of downside that's going to be coming to gas prices, and that could start in the next couple of weeks.
So the next question that I've got for you, Patrick, national geopolitical situations. We really don't seem to see a lot of a turmoil in crude oil prices at this point with regard to indictments of a former president, indictments of the current son of the current president, a possible impeachment here. There's a lot going on. But as far as you are seeing, that's really not having a major issue.
Nothing.
Is that correct?
No impact there. Anybody could be indicted. The president could be indicted. Anybody in the president's cabinet. That's not going to change how much you and I are going out to the shopping mall and filling our tank. So, that sort of news, unless it touches oil production, Matt. Yeah. It's. I mean, we had the BP CEO, basically Bernard Looney, that is retiring from BP, and even something like that doesn't have an impact because, again, it doesn't really impact much at BP. Right? They're still producing. They're still refining oil. Even a CEO leaving has basically no impact on what the supply and demand balance is, right? And it's all supply and demand, but I will take a note here because so much of my feed right now, everyone is like, oh, Alaska oil production, Biden canceled these leases and now prices are going up. So as an analyst, Matt, you have to look and analyze the situation. And that's why I'm doing this, is because I think a lot of people analyze the situation themselves. And it's like going to a football game, Matt, and there's a pass interference call and the hometown crowd doesn't like it. Suddenly you have 40,000 referees that know, what they're talking about. But the difference here, Matt, is that this area of Alaska where the president rescinded permits, first and foremost, there was basically nobody. 2 oil companies in the state of Alaska bid. Nobody wanted to bid, Matt, because Alaska is a vast wilderness. There's no infrastructure. So before you even drill, you have to build infrastructure, which is extremely costly. Then you have to drill in different areas to see where the oil is, right? There's no guarantee that there's going to be
sample drills, basically.
Right. Exactly. Drilling, it's exploration, right? You're exploring for where the oil might be. There's no guarantee that there's going to be oil. So, we saw very little participation in the leases that were sold off basically in Trump's last couple of weeks in the White House. So there's been no time for any of this infrastructure to be built. So something that was never drilled, that never produced in an area that never produced oil, is not going to be an impact to the price of oil. If this was shutting down rigs, Matt, that had been producing, millions of barrels, that's a game changer. That would impact prices. But drilling in an area that's never been drilled, that doesn't produce any oil now, is not an impact to oil prices now. So that's a big difference. The reason why prices did go up in the last couple of weeks were for issues you and I have talked about. The price of oil is up, but it's not because of leases. It's because the Saudis and Russians are engaging in a war on low prices of oil, and they extended their production cut, and because of refinery issues. So, the president doesn't get any credit for if prices go down in your neighborhood today. And most of why the reason the prices are going up all the reasons prices are going up have to do with refinery issues. It's like blaming the president for getting a nail in your tire, Matt. And I do like pointing the finger. I like blaming other people than I like blaming myself. I think that's natural human psychology, is we like to blame others. But if you want to blame somebody for high oil prices, the blame is really Russia's war in Ukraine and the Saudis and the Russians, their war on low oil prices. They're cutting production significantly. They're the number 2 and 3 largest oil producers globally. So it has nothing to do with silly drilling permits that were never drilled on anyway. Now, like I said, it would be a game changer if Biden all of a sudden told everyone in Texas to shut down drilling. Then we have a big problem. Right. But that is not the case here.
No, and the only reason why I bring it up, I've had several people over the past couple of weeks, talk to me, some on a personal level, some just in messaging me or whatever the case may be, indicating that they were fearful that all the U.S. geopolitical issues were causing the price in gas and increases in gas and other aspects. And, it's pretty obvious at this point that That is not the case, but just like you mentioned, Ukraine and other aspects, that is a slightly different story.
Well, that's what's hard to parse out, right? For the average person is they only see the drilling thing, right? If they're only reading about drilling from their favorite news outlets and they're not aware, hey, that Russia just extended their or that Saudi Arabia and Russia just extended their production cut, they don't know that happened. That's the key driver here. So it's all in the information too. Some people are not as much in touch with oil. They only hear 1 or 2 stories a week. Whereas, we're talking about constantly many stories influencing the price of oil. And that's the other mistake people think, is that oil only moves for one reason at a time, right? It's not that simple. Oil is moving for many different things, for the Saudis, for refineries, the price of gasoline, the summer gasoline blend, the winter gasoline blend, the demand. There's just a lot of different things to move the needle. So to put that to bed, oil prices are going to move based on much larger macro factors. And if you're politically aligned, you're probably not going to see some of the stories that are actually influencing the price of oil. And that goes for both sides. And by the way, I would like to say this. If President Biden is waging a war on oil production, he's doing a pretty lousy job, because oil production is almost at a record high. So, he's doing a pretty lousy job if this is a true war on oil production.
And you're the type of person to say this no matter what political party is in the White House. If the facts are the facts, that's what you say, and it doesn't really matter.
Well, as an analyst, you're not going to be a real good analyst if you don't see above your political views, right? If you can't parse that out, you're not going to make it in your career very far.
Right. Now, the only other question that I've got for you, and I'm pretty sure I already know the answer to this, but I know I'm going to be asked this over the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to pre-ask. So I've got the full answer. The auto strike, the United Auto Workers are poised to strike over the next 24 hours from, Ford, Chrysler, and GM. Understandably, that's going to halt production of new vehicles. Probably will not, I'm assuming, have an impact on oil or gas prices at this point.
Correct.
Just wanted to throw it out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I know it won't really have an impact. I mean, it might impact used car values and new car values.
You took the words out of my mouth. I'm like, it may increase the price of a vehicle, but not necessarily the price at the pump.
Exactly. It's all the supply chain. So Matt, again, if it's the vehicle supply chain, absolutely disruptions there, depending on how long a prospective strike would go. But, for oil and gasoline price to be impacted, the supply chain would have to be impacted. And by the way, I did just get a question. Somebody asked, what happens at a refinery like Irving Oil if Hurricane Lee hits while the refinery is doing its maintenance? With power outages, would the impact to the capacity be the same as if it were operational, or is it minimized? Thankfully, it's minimized because the refinery has been planning maintenance. Maintenance is generally planned months in advance. And so refineries, by the way, Matt, have contracts. And I think we've talked about this before, meaning they have contracts. They have to serve those contracts. And those contracts don't stop just because they have to do maintenance. So usually what Irving Oil or refinery does is, if they know they're undergoing maintenance, they're going to not sell as much gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel in the market preceding before.
So they've got the inventory.
Exactly. So they have enough gasoline to cover those contracts while their maintenance is happening. If they guess wrong in terms of how much gasoline they need, then Irving Oil will have to buy from another refinery. And that's why, by the way, the price in the Corn Belt shot up, because refineries can be big buyers. So the threat is minimized right now. To answer that question, there's usually a little bit less of a worry because the refinery is going to be down anyway. The problem is will Hurricane or Tropical Storm Lee disrupt maintenance from happening so long that the maintenance has to go longer than expected? And that remains to be seen. But that's why we also called out people that live in the northeastern United States, which get some product from this refinery, to watch the situation, because anything can happen. So keep an eye on it.
Absolutely. Anything else out there that I have missed? But Lord knows there's plenty to talk about. Anything that's on your crystal ball or your radar, so to speak, that we need to really mention?
Well, again, Matt, there have been some increases over the last couple of weeks, especially in the Corn Belt. And as I look, the average price in Nebraska is up 26 cents from a week ago. North Dakota, 25 cents. Oklahoma, 25 cents. Minnesota, 25 cents. So we see you. we definitely know there are some places that prices are spiking because we talked about them last episode and we foresaw that happening. The good news is that we move beyond those refinery issues, Matt, in the next week as we make the change to winter gasoline. There should be a bit more downward pressure on prices than there is upward pressure. And again, this is an active tug of war. Right now, I think the downside, the downward pressure is going to win the tug of war over the pressure that could pull prices up. But that balance could shift in the weeks ahead. So, we're going into fall. Demand is falling. But for now, I think there is some relief coming, definitely by the end of the year. And we'll definitely keep everyone updated. And by the way, anyone that's listening, if you have questions at Over a Barrel Show on Twitter, shoot us an email to podcast@gasbuddy.com. And Matt and I are both on Twitter, right, Matt?
Absolutely. Over a Barrel Matt is my handle. And I guess it's X, formerly known as Twitter. Is that what we're calling it these days? And then Gas Buddy Guy as well on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, I guess.
On that social platform that can't be named.
Yeah, it's like the artist formerly known as Prince, but it's X, formerly known as Twitter.
Social media platform formerly known as Twitter. Yeah,
there you go. There you go. Well, that's pretty much. Oh, well, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, but hopefully we'll be talking about some good news with some of the further changes. Like I said, we'll come back at you with a week. We'll give you another update in a week about hurricanes and about the switch over to winter blend. But with that, Matt, I'm done.
Yeah, well, I can't. We'll depart at least a little bit of good news because NASA says there's a trillion planets just like Earth waiting to be discovered. So if it all goes downhill here, at least we've got an option.
Hopefully. Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah.
We're going to be moving. It's just long distance moving.
It's a one-way trip. All right. Well, listen, thanks so much for joining us on Over a Barrel. Make sure you even listen to some of the past episodes as well, especially in some of the episodes that we were in Denver recording and a lot of other aspects as well. You've been listening to Over a Barrel. Thanks so much and have a good one.